Just after 10 a.m. on January 19th, 2023, a car rolled up near Emerson Street in Jacksonville. Three masked men hopped out and began chasing Dominique Moby Boatright toward a business lot. As gunfire cracked through the area, one witness locked onto a shooter wearing red. Moby fell behind a generator while the woman with him kept running for cover. When Jacksonville Sheriff's Office detectives pulled up, the scene had a familiar outline: shell casings scattered across the ground, surveillance angles capturing every movement, fleeing suspects, and a dead man lying in broad daylight. What threw the entire investigation sideways was the name trail that led straight back to Alan Bass and Alex Bass, identical twins from Grand Park. That single connection meant the face police wanted belonged to two people at once. This twist mattered immediately. Standard DNA usually gives detectives their cleanest path in murder cases, especially when witnesses are shaky, cameras are grainy, or shooters keep their faces wrapped up. The problem here was straightforward yet complicating. Identical twins come from the same fertilized egg, so the usual DNA profile cannot neatly separate one brother from the other. Once Alan Paperboy 5X Bass and Alex Mr. CEO 5X Bass surfaced in the Emerson Street case, investigators already knew the lab alone would not carry them home. That reality changed the whole approach. Detectives leaned harder on surveillance footage, phone movement data, clothing matches, vehicle ownership records, ride records, gun residue, and the precise timing of every step around the shooting. In most homicide files, science helps narrow the circle before the full story gets built. Here, the story had to do more of the heavy lifting first, while forensics lagged behind. That balance is exactly what made the Bass case stick in people's minds. To understand why those names were already ringing out in Jacksonville, it is necessary to go back to Grand Park first. Grand Park sits on Jacksonville's west side, where boarded up spots, low-income housing, weak job access, and heavy police attention had shaped daily life long before the Bass twins ever touched a microphone. Alan Bass and Alex Bass were born in the early 2000s to Kimberly Bass, a working mother who spent long hours trying to hold things together. Money stayed tight, so supervision often came from relatives or whoever happened to be outside. Older boys on neighborhood corners became the earliest role models before stable adults could fill that role. People who knew the twins early described them as athletic, polite, close as hell, and almost impossible to separate. They moved together, talked together, fought together, then protected each other the same way. That bond might have stayed harmless if the neighborhood had developed differently. Grand Park was already carrying years of shootings, buried grudges, and a street economy that rewarded image fast. While other kids found structure through school or sports, Alan and Alex kept drifting toward the individuals who had local weight, sharp talk, flashy phones, rental money, and enough influence to make that life seem normal. The pull did not happen overnight. Their story matters more than a simple good kid to bad kid switch, because the change came through layers of exposure, small choices, and repeated contact with the same pressure. Teachers reportedly saw ability in them, yet school discipline issues, skipped classes, early police contact, and weak program support kept pushing them off a straighter path. Around the same time, the twins began posting freestyles online. They studied Jacksonville rap culture closely, soaking up the language, swagger, and neighborhood politics tied to sets around Choway and nearby blocks. By their mid-teens, Alan and Alex were no longer just kids from Grand Park watching street life through a window. They were learning how music, loyalty, rumor, retaliation, and local identity all fed the same machine. That knowledge became critical once the larger Jacksonville war started heating up. The twins were coming of age right when names like Zion Brown, Young Gene Ace, Julio Fulio, Bibby, and Ace Cho began turning local beef into a running body count. As the Bass twins moved deeper into Grand Park streets, Jacksonville itself was already locked into a conflict where rap music mirrored real violence. Neighborhoods turned into sides with names like ATK, meaning Ace's Top Killers, and KTA, known as Kill Them All. The split was not just about songs or online talk. Police reports, court files, and interviews tied both groups to overlapping crews, meaning the same people dropping music were often tied to shootings across the city. The tension picked up serious weight in 2017 when Zion Brown, a teenage relative of rapper Julio Fulio, was shot and killed on Jacksonville's north side. Many people close to that circle treated the killing as a trigger event. Once that killing hit, retaliation did not stay quiet. Fulio later spoke about feeling pressure to respond, while rivals on the ATK side prepared for the same back-and-forth response. That back and forth reached a breaking point on June 5, 2018, when a targeted ambush on Town Center Parkway left 3 young men dead, including friends of Kenyatta Yungeen Ace Bullard. Ace himself survived after being shot multiple times. Reports from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office confirmed the attack was not random, which meant the violence had already crossed into organized retaliation rather than isolated incidents. That moment shifted the energy in the city. Survivors carried trauma forward while families demanded answers. Yet street loyalty pushed many away from cooperating with investigators. Once Ace survived, his music started reflecting what he lived through. Songs became more direct, more personal, and more tied to real names that people recognized. This is where things changed in a public way. Diss tracks like Who I Smoke from ATK-associated artists, plus responses from KTA members like Fulio, started naming dead rivals directly. The practice turned private grief into public entertainment. Families of victims spoke out in interviews with News 4 Jax, saying hearing their loved ones' names in songs reopened wounds. For younger listeners, however, those same tracks built identity, loyalty, and reputation. Over time, those names stopped being just memories. They became markers in the conflict, almost like a scoreboard people referenced when talking about who was up or down. As this culture spread through YouTube, Instagram, and local circles, violence gained another layer. Actions on the street fed music, and music pushed the next round of action. While all that played out, Alan and Alex Bass were watching closely. They learned not only who was connected to whom, but also how reputation moved, how names carried weight, and how quickly a person's story could shift from unknown to feared. They were not at the center yet, though they were close enough to feel the pressure. Grand Park sat near areas tied into the same network of alliances and rivalries. By the time the war reached full momentum, the twins were no longer just hearing about shootings after they happened. They were starting to move around people directly connected to those events. One name that kept coming up around the twins during that period was Charles McCormick, known locally as Ace Cho. He was connected to MBG and Zone 4 with ties that placed him close to the same network the Bass brothers were moving through. People around Grand Park described him as someone the twins looked up to, not just as a friend, but as a figure who already had standing in the streets. That presence made his role important in the early years. On August 9, 2019, Ace Cho was shot and killed. The detail appears in multiple timelines, even though mainstream coverage remained limited due to the number of similar incidents happening across Jacksonville at the time. That lack of coverage did not reduce the impact locally. Memorial posts, community reactions, and word of mouth carried the news through neighborhoods tied into the same conflict. After his death, people close to the twins said the mood around them shifted. Losing someone within your circle in that environment does not stay isolated. It spreads through everyone connected to that person. Some accounts from friends suggested strong reactions from Alan and Alex, though those statements mostly come from interviews given anonymously and cannot be treated as confirmed facts. What is clear is that their behavior and presence started changing after that point. Their names began showing up more often in conversations tied to ongoing tensions. Around the same period, their music began including references to real losses, with lyrics mentioning names like Ace Cho, Bibby, and others connected to the same timeline of violence. That shift from general street talk to specific references mattered. It showed a move from observing the conflict to positioning themselves inside it, even if law enforcement had not yet tied them to specific acts. At the same time, rumors started building online. Reddit threads, YouTube channels, and Instagram comments began linking the twins to retaliatory shootings, though none of those claims resulted in formal charges. That gap between what could be proven in court and what people believed on the street became a key part of their story. Reputation often travels faster than evidence in places like Grand Park. As more names got attached to them in conversations, their image grew, not through official records, but through repetition, speculation, and fear. By late 2019 into 2020, the Bass twins were no longer just two brothers making music in Jacksonville. They were being talked about as active players in the same conflict that had taken Ace Cho, Zion Brown, and others before them. That shift set the stage for what comes next. Once a name gains that kind of weight, image becomes more than appearance. It starts shaping how others respond to you. In places like Grand Park, rumors do not move randomly. They follow tension lines, social media chatter, and street conversations that turn small claims into accepted narratives over time. Once the Bass twins started getting mentioned alongside real incidents, online spaces like Reddit threads, YouTube breakdowns, and Instagram comments began linking their names to shootings that were never formally tied to them in court. That process matters because in those environments, repetition often replaces verification. It allows unproven stories to gain traction faster than confirmed facts released by police. While no major charges connected them to those early incidents, their names kept appearing in discussions around retaliation. That slowly built an image that did not depend on official records. One of the most talked about claims involved the supposed funeral home shooting in 2020. Bloggers and local gossip channels said masked gunmen opened fire during a service, targeting rivals connected to the same Jacksonville conflict. While police statements did not match the scale of the story being shared across platforms. That gap between online claims and verified information shows how myth builds. A dramatic version of events often travels further than a confirmed report. Still, the rumor stuck partly since it fit the existing narrative that the twins were becoming more active, which made the story believable to those already following the conflict. At the same time, their music started reinforcing that image. Videos showed them holding firearms, referencing neighborhoods, and using language tied directly to the ATK versus KTA divide that defined Jacksonville's street culture. Even without millions of views, those clips circulated within the right circles where reputation mattered more than mainstream attention. Their presence grew steadily. As more people associated them with violence, fear started blending with curiosity. Some individuals avoided them, while others watched closely to see what they would do next. That combination created a situation where their name alone carried weight even without clear legal proof tying them to specific crimes. Law enforcement did not ignore that shift. Jacksonville Sheriff's Office units began tracking social media activity, monitoring movements, and noting repeated associations between the twins and known figures in ongoing investigations. While that attention did not immediately lead to strong cases, it marked a change in how authorities approached them. They were no longer just local rappers with minor records. As surveillance increased quietly in the background, the focus began shifting from rumors to patterns. This set up the next stage where observation would eventually turn into direct action. As police attention grew, the challenge remained the same. Awareness alone does not lead to arrests without solid evidence that can stand inside a courtroom. Records show minor charges involving the twins, including drug possession, driving violations, and an aggravated assault case that did not move forward. That pattern suggested ongoing issues without providing a breakthrough. It kept them on law enforcement radar while also showing how difficult it was to tie them to larger incidents despite ongoing suspicion. While investigators tracked movements and associations, the twins continued balancing music releases with street presence, maintaining visibility in both spaces at the same time. During that period, social media activity hinted at rising tension. Posts included indirect references to rivals, coded language tied to specific neighborhoods, and visuals that suggested ongoing conflict without stating details directly. Those signals mattered to people inside that environment because they could read meaning behind phrases that outsiders might overlook. This kept the cycle moving quietly beneath public awareness. Around the same time, Dominique "Moby" Boatright began appearing more frequently in conversations tied to the opposite side. Locals described his reputation as serious, disciplined, and connected to multiple violent incidents. Though not all claims were verified, Moby's presence added pressure to an already tense situation. Individuals like him carried influence that extended beyond music into actual street operations. Any conflict involving his name had wider implications. As mentions of both sides increased, the atmosphere shifted toward expectation. People began anticipating retaliation rather than reacting to it after the fact. By early 2023, the streets were already leaning toward another escalation. This set the stage for the moment on Emerson Street where everything would finally come together. On January 19th, 2023, just after 10 a.m., Dominique "Moby" Boatright was riding through Jacksonville with a woman identified in court documents as AM. They moved through a regular morning route near Emerson Street without any visible sign of immediate danger. As their vehicle approached a business area close to St. Augustine Road, surveillance footage later showed another car pulling into position nearby. It aligned itself in a way that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Within seconds, 3 masked men stepped out of that second vehicle, each holding firearms. Witnesses nearby reported hearing rapid gunfire before they could fully process what was happening. The sudden shift from routine movement to active shooting created chaos. Both occupants of the first vehicle abandoned it and attempted escape on foot toward a nearby business structure. As the situation escalated, the attackers did not remain at a distance. At least one shooter pursued the victims directly, turning what began as a drive-by style attack into a close-range chase that increased the likelihood of fatal contact. According to witness statements and later testimony, Moby attempted to move deeper into the property, though his path was cut off as the shooters closed in. This left him with limited space to maneuver. Surveillance angles captured portions of this pursuit, showing one individual wearing a red hoodie moving more aggressively than the others. That detail later became a focal point for investigators. The woman accompanying Moby managed to separate from him during the chase. She used nearby structures for cover, which allowed her to avoid immediate fatal injury despite sustaining gunfire earlier. That separation marked a critical moment. It meant one person survived long enough to provide an account while Moby was forced into a confined position behind a generator unit where he could no longer escape. Witnesses described hearing additional shots fired at close range. This aligned with forensic findings indicating multiple gunshot wounds delivered after the initial attack. When officers later reconstructed the sequence, they determined that the shooting shifted from pursuit to execution at that point. The attackers intended to finish the target rather than retreat after initial contact. The red hoodie worn by one shooter remained the most consistent visual detail across all accounts. Faces were concealed, leaving clothing as the strongest identifying feature. After the shooting concluded, the 3 attackers returned to their vehicle quickly and left the scene within seconds. Police units from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office arrived shortly after. They secured the area, documented shell casings, and identified multiple impact points on the victim's vehicle. Moby was pronounced dead at the scene while the woman was transported for medical treatment. She later became a key witness whose description supported the timeline established through video evidence. Detectives immediately began canvassing surrounding businesses for surveillance footage. Multiple camera angles captured the arrival, movement, and exit of the suspects. Through that footage, investigators were able to map the sequence of events with relative clarity, even though the shooters' identities remained hidden behind masks. This reinforced the importance of indirect identifiers like clothing, posture, and timing. The Emerson Street shooting quickly became central to the broader investigation because it provided a clear, documented incident tied to known individuals within an already active conflict. With that foundation established, attention shifted toward identifying the suspects through patterns rather than direct facial recognition. This set up the next phase where evidence would need to compensate for what DNA could not provide. Once detectives began processing evidence from Emerson Street, the first significant lead came from the vehicle captured on surveillance footage. Its license plate was partially visible, allowing investigators to trace it back to a registered owner connected to Kimberly Bass, the mother of Alan and Alex Bass. That connection did not immediately confirm involvement, though it provided a starting point that linked the suspect's transportation directly to the twins' household. When officers obtained a search warrant and examined the vehicle, they recovered clothing items, including a red hoodie that visually matched the one seen in surveillance footage. This created an early physical link between the scene and the suspects. Forensic testing on that hoodie revealed gunshot residue, which indicated proximity to a firearm discharge. Experts clarified that residue alone could not prove who actually fired the weapon. Despite that limitation, the hoodie became a key piece of the case because it aligned with both witness descriptions and video evidence. It strengthened its relevance within the overall investigation. At the same time, detectives analyzed cell site data from phones associated with Alan Bass. The data showed his device connecting to towers near Emerson Street around the time of the shooting. That information did not pinpoint exact positioning, though it placed him within a range consistent with the timeline reconstructed from surveillance footage. Further investigation uncovered ride-share records showing that Alan had been transported earlier that morning to a location near the crime scene. The driver later confirmed that he dropped off a passenger matching Alan's description, including clothing similar to what appeared in the footage. That detail added another layer because it established a presence in the area before the attack occurred. It connected movement patterns with the sequence of events captured on video. When detectives combined the vehicle link, clothing evidence, phone data, and ride records, they began forming a narrative that did not rely on a single definitive piece, but rather a combination of consistent elements pointing in the same direction. The absence of DNA separation between the twins remained a known limitation throughout the process. Standard testing could not distinguish whether Alan or Alex physically handled specific items connected to the crime. Instead of pursuing advanced sequencing methods, which required conditions not available in this case, prosecutors focused on behavior patterns, timing, and physical associations that could differentiate individual actions. Investigators also identified a third individual believed to be involved, referred to in documents as EW. He initially provided statements linking the twins to the incident, though that cooperation later weakened when the individual declined to testify in court. That setback forced prosecutors to rely even more heavily on the remaining evidence. They emphasized consistency across independent sources rather than direct eyewitness identification of faces. As the case developed, Each piece that might have seemed weak in isolation gained strength when viewed together. This created a structure where circumstantial evidence formed a cohesive argument. With enough material assembled to support charges, law enforcement moved toward arresting Alan Bass. This set the stage for a trial where the central question would not be whether a shooting occurred, but whether the available evidence could prove which of the identical twins was responsible. By late 2023, Alan Bass was brought into a Duval County courtroom where prosecutors began laying out a case built step by step from surveillance footage, phone data, and physical evidence tied to the Emerson Street shooting. The state focused on how each piece aligned. They showed jurors the vehicle traced to Kimberly Bass, the red hoodie recovered during the search, and the timeline placing Alan near the scene before and after the attack. As witnesses took the stand, including the surviving victim AM and the rideshare driver, their accounts reinforced the sequence already captured on camera, even though none could directly identify a face behind the mask. Prosecutors framed the argument around consistency. They explained that while no single element proved guilt alone, the combination created a clear path pointing toward Alan's role in the shooting. The defense approached the case from a different angle. Their strategy centered on the fact that Alan Bass has an identical twin, Alex Bass. This introduced doubt about who actually carried out specific actions seen in the footage. Attorneys argued that surveillance video remained too unclear to distinguish individuals, especially when faces were covered. Clothing like a red hoodie could easily be worn by either brother. They also challenged the reliability of witness memory under stress. On top of that, they highlighted the DNA limitation. They reminded jurors that forensic testing could not separate one twin from the other, which meant physical evidence alone could not confirm identity. As the trial progressed, jurors were left balancing uncertainty against repetition. Multiple independent pieces of evidence kept pointing in the same direction, even though none provided absolute confirmation on its own. Prosecutors emphasized how Alan's phone movement matched the timeline, how the vehicle connection aligned with surveillance footage, and how the hoodie tied together witness descriptions and forensic findings. Defense attorneys continued pressing the idea that similarity between the twins created reasonable doubt. They argued that the state's case relied heavily on interpretation rather than direct identification. After the closing arguments, the jury moved into deliberation. They weighed whether the combined evidence met the threshold required for conviction. Following several days of discussion, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on charges including first-degree murder, attempted second-degree murder, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The decision reflected their conclusion that while the DNA issue remained unresolved, the overall pattern of evidence pointed strongly enough toward Alan's involvement. At sentencing, the court imposed life imprisonment without parole, along with additional years tied to the attempted murder charge. This effectively ensured he would remain incarcerated for life. Reactions in the courtroom reflected that divide. Moby Boatright's family expressed relief that accountability had been established, while supporters of Alan argued that uncertainty around identity had not been fully addressed. As the case closed for Alan, attention shifted toward Alex Bass. His legal situation remained unresolved because prosecutors had not secured enough evidence to bring the same level of charges against him at that time. That gap left questions hanging, not only about his role in the Emerson Street shooting, but also about how identical twin cases might continue to challenge future investigations. With the verdict delivered, the legal chapter reached a conclusion for one brother, though the larger story still carried unresolved parts moving forward. Following the trial, Alan Bass was transferred into Florida's state prison system. He now serves a life sentence tied to the events of January 19, 2023. This marked a final outcome shaped more by circumstantial alignment than direct forensic separation. While his legal path narrowed to appeals focused on evidentiary arguments, Alex Bass remained in custody on unrelated charges. This left open the possibility of future developments depending on whether new evidence emerges. That difference created a split outcome between two individuals who shared the same genetic profile. It highlighted how legal decisions can diverge even when biological identity remains identical. Outside the courtroom, conversations did not slow down. Online forums, social media pages, and local discussions continued debating the case, often blending confirmed facts with speculation about roles that were never fully proven. Within Jacksonville, reactions stayed divided. Some residents expressed relief that a violent incident had led to accountability, while others questioned whether uncertainty around identity should have carried more weight in the final decision. For families connected to the broader conflict, including those who lost individuals like Dominique, Moby, Boatright, the verdict did not erase the loss. Grief continues beyond any courtroom outcome.